Okay, today we're going to do just a quick little tutorial on how to create two color spaces, an additive color space and a subtractive color space. And the way we're going to show this is in two separate color wheels. And then in addition, I'm going to show a little bit of some tricks in here about how to save your layers in Photoshop to be able to generate image assets. So to get started, I'm going to create a new file in Photoshop. And that file we're going to create is going to be 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels, 72 dpi RGB color space. This color profile down here, there's really only two color spaces that we'll probably ever really be using, particularly in this class. It could be Adobe RGB 1998 and sRGB. Adobe RGB 1998 is usually what I use when I'm going to be editing images that are eventually going to go into print, and sRGB is what I usually use if I'm going to have images that are going to go onto web. There's different kind of rules and exceptions to these, but for the purposes of this class, that's what you can kind of think of. The rest of these color spaces that you see in here are ones that you likely won't be using anytime soon, so you can kind of just disregard those. So for the purposes of this assignment, we're going to select Adobe RGB 1998. Okay, and square pixels is the standard, and we'll click OK to create. When I started this project in here, zoom in just a little bit. Oops, there we go. Okay. So to start this project, the primary panel that I'm going to be looking at the most is going to be my layers panel here. So I'm just going to click and drag that out and make it a little bit bigger so that we're focused on that. As far as the actual workspace that I'm in here, I'm using the painting workspace. So if you want to follow along and use the painting workspace, a lot of the tools will be in the same spot for that. So I've got my layers opened, and right now I've actually got my background set to be black. You can when you first open up Photoshop, you can tell it would be whatever color you want. But I don't personally like the background layer in Photoshop the way it creates it, because it's basically this locked layer that's all pixel based, and I don't need a pixel based layer to create a background. So what I like to do is I like to go into my layers, choose a new fill layer, and we choose a solid color. I'll go ahead and name this one. I'm going to start with a white background. And we'll say OK. And then, of course, I actually want to choose it white, so I'll slide that color slider up into the white part up here. Anytime I click in here to change colors, it's going to show my before and after color down here. So I had black before, and now I have a white. Okay, so I've got a white background in here. So now that I've got a white background, I don't really need this black background anymore. So I can click and drag it down into the trash. Okay, so I got a white background. And the purpose of this assignment is to create color spaces that reflect what we see in web color space and what we see in print color space. In web color space, we see RGB colors. All of our monitors use pixels that will reject exactly red, green, and blue, and they'll use it in different values to kind of mix, and it creates this optical illusion of full color. Print is the same thing, except for it uses cyan, magenta, and yellow. In addition to yellow, it uses black to kind of reinforce the darker colors. Let's see, so since I've got a white background here, I'm going to start with the cyan, magenta, and yellow, which is going to be the subtractive color space. Okay, so I'm going to use the vector circle over here, and if you hover over the vector circle, you'll see it pops up and it says it's the ellipse tool, and the keyboard shortcut for that is U. So it's always good to kind of get used to using the keyboard shortcuts. I like to use them all the time, so click U and I'm automatically on that tool. Okay, and if I want to get real precise with this, I can draw guides in and everything, but I'll deal with that a little bit later on. I'm not too worried about that right now. So starting with the circle, I'm going to click and drag, and then I hold down the Shift key there to make this an exact circle. So I'm going to make this circle about 500 pixels by 500 pixels. Doesn't have to be exactly that size, but we'll start there. Okay. Now I've got that. I'm going to drag it up. I don't really necessarily need guides because I've got smart guides turned on. As I drag this around, it's going to tell me when I get close to like the edge or when something lines up at the middle. So bam, right there. I know I've got it lined up in the middle. Okay, so in my layers right now, I've got this ellipse, and I'm going to start naming this. I always want to name my layers as much as I possibly can, just to keep things clear. So I'm starting with the cyan, magenta, and yellow, so I'm going to just name this one cyan. After I get done with that, I'm going to choose my direct selection tool here, which is the A key. And as soon as, because I already had it selected, as soon as I grab that tool, I already have these vectors selected, but I can go in here and highlight and select them this way if they're not already selected. Up in the fill panel and the stroke panel, I want to make it have no stroke. So I'm going to go click on the stroke and go to this no fill, the box with a little red line through it. And then in the fill, this is where I actually want to tell it what color it's going to be. So I click on this box here, which was that little color picker box in the top right corner, and that opens this up. Once I get into the color picker, I want to choose the color, and this is going to be 100% cyan. So I'll say 100, 0, 0, 0. I click OK. There, I've got a cyan circle. Okay, so now to repeat this process, I'm just going to use the same circle over and over again. There's a couple different ways that I can do this. I can like duplicate this layer by dragging it. By dragging it down onto this little plus sign down here. We'll create an extra layer. I can also use my move tool here, and if I click on this and then I hold down the option key, this funny little symbol you see on the screen is the option key. If I click and hold on that, it will actually create a copy at the same time, which is a super easy way to do this. So I'm going to grab this copy and just move this down. And then the next little cheat I'm going to use here is when I hold copy again, move this over, and I can hold the shift key down if I want to move it straight over. So I'm holding the option key down to copy and the shift key down to move it over in a straight line. Okay. And then I'm going to select these two layers here because I'm just going to use them and just line them up and get them in the center here. I'll do a little more adjustments later, but I just want to get those in the center. So I have 3 cyan layers. We want to have a cyan, magenta, and yellow. So I'm going to leave this top one as cyan. This next layer here, when I click on the A key or I go to the direct selection tool, that allows me to select this layer, and then I can go to the fill and change this color. And I'm actually going to change my layer names first just to keep it from getting confusing. So I'm going to go cyan, magenta, and yellow. Okay, so on the magenta one, got the direct selection tool, select my vector background here, click on the fill, and click on my color picker. In here, I'm going to change this to 0, 100, 0, 0. So now that's a magenta layer. And next in here, select this yellow layer. Click and drag and highlight that up there. I'm going to check on the color picker again, and I'm going to convert this. Now you notice like I made this one 100% cyan before, and then when I come back here it says 93% cyan and 100% and 4% magenta. I'll show you again. I'll change this to 100 and 0, close it, and then I'm going to select it and open it again and click on it, and there it goes back to 93.4. And the reason it does that is because when I tell it to be 100% cyan, this is an RGB document, so it kind of like has to make an adjustment to go, I can't make 100% cyan, but I can make a 93 cyan and make it look about right if I add a little bit of magenta to it. But don't worry about that. How it adjusts it is not going to affect this project at all. Okay, so we have yellow. We're going to go cyan. It's going to be 0, 0 magenta, and 100% yellow, and 0 black. I will say OK. Close that color picker out. So now I basically have my color space set with a white background. I use a white background because in a subtractive color space, which is where the light is bouncing off of a paper surface, and then you're getting a reflection of what's left of that light. So it's actually subtracting light out of this process. We use a white background as a contrast point because everything, when we combine all this together, it's going to go to a dark color. So to represent this, what I do is I'm going to choose, I'm just going to click on like cyan, and I hold the shift key down and click on yellow. So I have cyan, magenta, and yellow selected. And then this is the blend mode up here. There's a whole bunch of different modes in here, but the chances are the ones you're going to use the most is probably going to be, actually the one you're going to use probably the most is multiply. It's the one I use the most, and that's what we're going to use in this case. So we're going to multiply. And now we can kind of see how these overlap. All I'm going to do right now is I'm going to adjust these a little bit. So I've got the magenta and the cyan are on the bottom. I'm going to select these two layers by shift clicking and selecting them both. And I'm going to use this move key here. And what I'm doing is I'm just moving this down until I get what looks like a pretty regular rectangle in the middle of these three dots. Now you might have more overlap than this or less overlap than this. I'm actually going to give it just a little bit more overlap. So I'm going to go in and choose just the cyan one here, move it in like this a little bit. I'll choose both the cyan and the magenta and slide that over till it gets to the middle. Right there, I think is about right. That looks about right. And then I can move this up until this triangle looks a little bit bigger. I'm just trying to get symmetry in here where all the different points in here look about the same. Okay. And then I can get real particular if I want about like centering this whole thing in this grid if I want to, kind of get some equal space. Okay. So now that we've messed around with that enough, we can kind of move on. Okay, I've got these three circles in here, and they are usually the multiply blend mode, which creates this effect that we want to see with cyan, magenta, and yellow. Because when we take cyan, magenta, and yellow, combine them together, we get basically a black. In cyan, magenta, and yellow printing process, you can see how this black is not quite completely black. It's really close, but not quite. So in printing, we add black or the K plate, the key plate, to the process because it basically reinforces and makes the blacks darker. And it also gives printers something to align the other colors to. So that's why it's called the K plate or the key plate. But otherwise, the color space is basically, it's just cyan, magenta, and yellow. So I have these in here, and I like to keep my layers nice and organized. So I'm going to click on the white background here, shift click all the way up to cyan. So I've got them all selected. And then if I come down here and I click on the folder while all of those are selected, it will actually create a layer group. And it puts all of those layers into this group nice and organized. So I'm going to name this layer group. I'm going to call this additive. So that's my additive, I'm sorry, backwards. Subtractive. Let's try that. So this is our subtractive color space. Now I'm going to make the additive color space next. And rather than starting over and creating this whole process again, I'm just going to take this whole folder here and copy it. And the way I'm going to do that is just take this whole folder I've got right here and drag it down onto this plus sign. And now I've got an exact copy of that. Sometimes when you do this, depending on your settings, it might put, cyan and the word copy behind it, or the subtractive folder might put copy behind it. I have my settings set up so it doesn't do that because I find that to be kind of annoying. But if it does do that, you can go in and just edit that and change it to what you want it to be. So I'm going to change these names anyways because they're not correct. First off, up here where it says subtractive, I'm going to change this to additive. White background is going to be a black background. Oops. Yellow is going to be, actually I'm going to start with cyan, cyan is going to be blue. Because we have RGB, so we got blue, magenta is going to be red, and then oddly enough, the yellow is going to turn into green here. Yeah. Okay, so we've got the naming conventions kind of set up, additive, blue, red, green, and a black background. So now I'm going to go in and actually start changing how these work. So first off, this black background, I'm going to go in and if I just double click on this, because it's just a fill layer, and I should mention also, right now this is just a fill layer. These don't really have any pixels. It's just information telling it to fill this with white or fill this with black. These are all vector items that just tell these to fill with whatever color I've got to fill. So there's really not much difference between this file and a Illustrator file as far as how it's constructed. It's in what I created it this way because using vectors and using these fill layers keeps the file size super, super small. If I used raster-based, pixel-based images in here, it would make a much larger image, and I'm always trying to save space. So if I go in here and double click on this black background, now I can actually go in here and choose to make it black. Everything kind of disappears because we have all these layers set to multiply, and we multiply on black, it just is more black. So where we've got red in here, I'm going to choose my direct selection tool or use the A key to automatically select this one. And just go ahead and drag over the top of it and select it there. Make sure you got it. Fill color, this is the blue one. So I'm going to go in and 0 red, 0 green, and the maximum value in RGB is 255. Okay. Then in the red, do the same thing, select that, go up to the color picker, go in here, 255, 0, 0, and we've got it. Last one is the green. Make sure I got that selected. Click on this. Red's going to be 0, green's going to be 255, blue's going to be 0. Yeah, we got it. Now, of course, we can't see anything right now because these are in this multiply mode. And when it's multiplying in black, everything just goes to black. So we're going to switch this. We have a black background in an additive color space because we're adding white or adding light, and the light is going to contrast with a black background. And so instead of multiply, we're going to go down to the next area down here. We're going to come into lighten, or screen kind of does the same thing. They're real similar in this. Actually, so we'll go screen or lighten. I guess you can choose either one. So right now, I'm gonna just click outside of here to deselect. So you can see we've got red, green, and blue. And when they all come together in the middle here, they create a white space, a white field. So the difference between the two, red, green, blue, create white, RGB, or I'm sorry, CMYK makes black, and RGB makes white. And so this is the print color space where I have subtractive, and this is the kind of the web or digital color space. And the relationship between these two, so we know that with the digital color space, we use red, green, and blue because humans have red, green, and blue cones in their eyes. And so we kind of follow that because that's the three colors we can truly naturally see, and combinations of those colors allow us to see, sort of all these other colors. So you can see the relationship in here is that when we combine red and green, we get yellow, and when we combine red and blue, we get magenta, and when we combine blue and green, we get cyan. So we actually use cyan, magenta, and yellow, red, green, and blue to make cyan, magenta, and yellow. So we're creating sort of those colors in the subtractive color space. And if we go back and look at the subtractive color space in here, the yellow, magenta, and cyan make black, but when we combine them together, we get yellow and magenta together makes red, magenta and cyan together makes blue, and cyan and yellow together makes green. So we make our red, green, and blue. So in each space, those colors combined together will actually make the colors from the other space. So there's this strong direct relationship between these two color spaces, and it's all based on the cones that we have in our eyes and how when we see these different colors in these spaces, that we can create these optical illusions where we can see all the colors, or think we can see all the colors in the rainbow. So this is the basic of making this color wheel. Just adding these colors, putting them in either the multiply blend mode or in the screen, or it's either the screen or the lighten blend mode in here. That will create these spaces. But I wanted to show one more thing in here as part of this assignment. To be able to actually save this file out, so I'm gonna go ahead and save this file to my computer on my desktop. And here we're going to just call this CMYK RGB and in a student's case, you're going to put first initial last name. That's the naming convention. CMYK RGB, your first initial last name. So in my case, of course, it would be CHEIDLE. We'll get into the naming conventions a little bit more, but this is going to make it real simple for this process. So I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file onto my desktop. So there we go. And now if I'm going to move this window over so hopefully we can see this. So this is my file that I just saved here on my desktop. But what I'm going to do is on these layers, I'm going to give them a file extension. So I'm going to say this is going to have a .png file extension at the end of it. And this one, I'm going to give a .png file extension to it. And this language that we're putting in here helps Photoshop to create some assets that it can export. And the way we export these assets is super, super easy. We just go up to File, and we go to generate image assets. And it's important to, when you do this, you want to actually save your file to wherever it's going to go first, because that's how it knows where to put those assets. So I save my CMYK RGB file to my desktop. And so when I go up here and say I want to generate image assets, all of a sudden it's going to create a folder on my desktop that have those image assets. And when I open this up, you can see now it's got additive, subtractive, PNG. And these are exactly what these folder groups are in here. And so there's a lot of different naming conventions that you can get into that make it even more complex. I'll just show a couple in here. So within this space, the additive and subtractive, in fact, I'll open this up so we can see it kind of happen live here. There we go. So if I change these folders to, instead of having PNG, I'm going to give them JPEG, and you see automatically it just switched that one. I didn't have to save it or do anything. It just said, oh, that's a JPEG now. If I want to have both of them in here, I can say comma additive .png. And now what it's going to do is it's going to give me an additive layer. And I totally misspelled that. So I'm going to come back in and redo that. That looks better, additive. And as soon as I click OK, it's going to fix my spelling and everything for me. So additive. So it's got two of them in here. They're essentially identical images, but one is a JPEG and one is a PNG file. I can get more complicated with it if I want to and go, okay, I'm going to put a 50% in front of this PNG file, and it's going to redo this. And now you can see that the PNG is half the size that it used to be, but I didn't put it for the additive, so the additive is still 100% of what it used to be. So there's a lot of different things I can do with this. I can generate a lot of different image assets, and the nice thing is that I'm not actually messing anything up. I can also get in and kind of start doing some layer organization in here too. So if I wanted to put these into a different folder, so I'm going to put these in a folder called color wheel, and I put a dash or a slash in there. Get that correct. And so now there's a folder with color wheel, and it's going to hold the asset that is right next to it. So color wheel is right in front of, and I'll open this up a little bit so we can start to read in here. Obviously, when you do this, you can start getting some really long file names. And in fact, I think if I remember right, they may have changed it, but as I recall, you can have characters 200 up to 256 characters in your file name. And it gets to looking like just a long string of code basically when you get there, but it starts to add a lot of like functionality. So a color wheel is in a folder now. If I want to put subtractive in the same folder, all I got to do is just name it the same folder, and it will recognize and go, oh, okay, I already have that folder. So color, oops, color wheel and / just like that. And now it's put that other one in this folder too. I can also, the kind of cool thing is I come in here, like if I want to export these assets separately, I can just drop in a file extension in the end. I like to cheat this a little bit. Anytime I can copy, paste, make things go faster, I'm going to do that. So I'm just copying and pasting this extension at the end. And so now we've got blue, red, green, and if I want to get organized with it, I could say, let's just call this single color folder. Single color, and then I'm just going to select, oh, another typo. I'm so good at making typos. So single color, and then I'm going to just select this whole part right here because that's my folder name. So then if I come in and double click on this red, go right at the beginning of it and paste that in, single color, then I don't have to type it again because as you see, I make typos all the time. So I got single color, blue, red, green. So now I should have a folder in here called single color that just contains my blue, red, green. So this is really nice because as I work in here, it just keeps everything super organized for me. Whatever I have in here automatically exports. And in fact, let's see if I can make this work. Additive PNG. I'm going to see if I can get this to live update. So if I open this in Photoshop, and I'm just going to open this in a, oops, arrange to up vertical, so we can see both at the same time. Zoom in on this. So this is the asset that I exported from the original, and this is the original that's on the right-hand side here. So if I click on this, I can see my layers, and I'm going to come in here. So this whole thing is based on this layer group that's called color wheel. And so I'm going to actually create a new layer in here. The more layers I add in here, it's just going to add more complexity to this particular image. So when I put this in here now, and I'm just going to use a paintbrush and random color, hard to find a color that will stand out in this weird group. Here, we'll find something that's, oh, what do we do? I'll try that. What the heck? Okay, so I've got a color, and I'm just going to pick a smaller brush with more hardness and do a quick little painting in here. Let's see if we get, so I need to turn my opacity up. There we go. Boom. Okay, so that's been added to it. You can see it's actually live updated, and if I go into this and just say, oh, why should we revert it? I'm going to close that and show it this way. This over. Okay, I'm just going to do, let's see, do this, and we're going to make this really big. Okay, now we can do this a little better. So you can see as I like draw on this, it's going to just automatically just update whatever I do in here. So, and then obviously as soon as I get rid of this object in here, it will update it and turn it back to what it was originally. So anyways, this is kind of another little rabbit hole of things you can go down as far as ways that you can name your files, different file extensions, and ways of organizing things. I've used this a bunch to be able to create a lot of assets. It's a great tool. As we get further into things, I'll give you more of a demonstration on this. But for now, what I want you to do for this assignment is you'll, first off, you're going to take these files here together. I want you to upload all of this. So I'm going to go folder. If I select both of these at the same time and click new folder with selected items, it takes those two items and puts them in this new folder. And then I can actually name this one the same thing, like CMYK RGB first initial last name. Spell my own name. So I've got it in this little folder, all nice and organized. Click on this folder, compress it, and it's going to get me a zip file. And a zip file is just a really nice compressed file format that unifies everything and makes it safe for email. So if I look at my original folder, we'll see how big this is. My original folder, 586K. I'm guessing the zip probably isn't much smaller because it was a pretty small file to begin. 6. Oh, it did actually. It's 176K, so it is significantly smaller. And that's probably because of all the assets I exported. Anyways, so this is what you will upload, this zip file. You'll actually email it to me. My email address, I'll put it on the screen here. THEIDLE at Comcast, .net. There we go. A little smaller, and there we go. And check it out. I have this little Comcast.net in here. If I go in behind that and put .png, see if it worked. Might not because it's got two. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and just remove. Let's see if we can trick it into making it for us. Try one more thing. I'm going to turn this into a smart object. Read my layers. Convert to smart object. See if that tricks it. Well, it's all pointless anyways. Don't really need to do that. Just seeing what I could do. It's fun to goof around a little bit. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That is the assignment, making the RGB CMYK additive subtractive color space. After you've done this project, typically like through in-class assignment, I want you to then go and create new color wheels, but instead of using boring circles, use something that's more fun, interesting, and creative. Surprised me with this, but I want them to overlap and have the same sort of color mixing so that we see whatever you come up with combined together in some cool way. Vector objects obviously work great, but you can use raster objects. You just want to make sure they have enough opacity that you can see it when they overlap a little bit. So that is due at the beginning of the next class. We'll take a look at that real quick and we'll move on to the next lesson. All right, well, I hope that that is relatively clear. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you at our next lesson.